Okay, welcome everyone. We're with Shawn Sowers, Higher Education Practice Leader with LS3P Associates, based in Raleigh, North Carolina. Shawn, thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Happy to be here, Dave.
So Shawn, we wanted to check in with you. You wrote a blog, I think it was back in April, discussing the whole return to campus and what universities and colleges need to do to make that happen. And of course, here we are. So I wanted to get your sense now working with your clients, sort of observing what's happening across other universities and colleges in the United States. Kind of what's working and what's not working. I know it's kind of a messy situation in some cases. Other schools are faring a little bit better. Shawn, what are your observations?
Sure. Well, the impetus of doing the blog and really a research paper back in the spring was we were getting questions from some of our college and university clients of help us figure out how many students we can get back into class. What is this going to mean in terms of our enrollment capacities, and how can we address classes that used to seat 50 students and now we can only fit half of that based on the social distancing recommendations. So we did a pretty comprehensive study of different facilities that we had designed, also working with our clients on some other facilities that were pre-existing, and helped them to determine what occupancies they could get back into their classroom spaces. And in general, we were finding that the occupancies were even lower than were expected. So having a series of guidelines and some metrics for them to look at in terms of how the registrars could even schedule classes and students in seats was a really big help to so many of our institutions, and that became a foundation for many in terms of developing their plans for the return to campus this fall. Mm-hmm. So I'm pleased to say that for the most part that was adapted pretty well in our academic settings as students came back onto campus. I think the greater challenges that we've seen as the return to campus has happened is what happens outside of the academic classroom. So where we are bringing students back to campus and seeing spikes in cases or clusters developing has really been around that behavior outside. So having large gatherings, having events either on or off campus does seem to be a trigger to that, as well as we've seen a direct correlation with the on-campus residences, and where we have resi halls that have double occupancies versus single occupancies, we're seeing much more outbreaks in those double occupancy spaces. So there seems to be a correlation between how much we've been able to decant the density of housing, similar to what we saw with senior living centers across the country as well. So I think we've learned a lot in we're roughly 2 months into the return to campus in the fall semester now, and we've definitely learned some best practices out of that experience that as we roll into the spring semester will definitely be applicable moving forward.
I'd love to jump into trends beyond COVID-19, particularly as they pertain to longer-term capital spending. As an editorial team, we've been tracking where the money's flowing and university and college campuses, and a lot of it had to do with student housing, whether it's on or off campus. You get into the S&T and health-related buildings. And then, of course, rec centers and student unions and student centers. Is any of that changing? I mean, I guess, what is COVID going to do to the flow of money and where funding comes from, and kind of what projects are going to happen on these campuses moving forward?
I think we're seeing a definite trend across the country, really, and around the world of reduced spending right now in our academic institutions. So the reduction in fee generation, be that from student fees and parking and transportation funds, rec centers, those exact things, those revenues have dropped significantly as students have stayed home and not been going back to campuses. We're also seeing such a significant cut in funding that's coming from state and local governments, and we're also seeing drop-offs in funding sources that are coming from our capital campaigns and donor pools as well. Universities are facing a lot of deep cuts right now in terms of their own staffing. So we're seeing a real trend right now in furloughs and layoffs. And we're also seeing capital projects that were planned for at the beginning of the year now are going on hold and perhaps being delayed further down the road. All of that is happening while we're still seeing operations and maintenance costs go up on aging facilities, and we're seeing deferred maintenance continue to pile up. And I think that was a trend that we were already seeing. So I think from funding sources that are going to be moving forward and projects that will continue, I do believe that a lot of that will happen in renovations and upgrades to existing facilities. I think we will be looking very closely at efficiencies and how we're using the existing capital that we have on campuses, looking for ways to maybe repurpose some of those spaces or provide infrastructure upgrades that are going to improve energy efficiency and learning outcomes and use those in different capacities than where they are right now. I think there's been a lot of talk about what COVID's effect has been on the classroom itself and how we're seeing learning pedagogies evolve during this. I think there was a definite push toward the flipped classroom heading into COVID, and now I think that has a lot more traction and support. We've seen how that can happen after having to make such a quick shift back in the spring and now having the summer months to really launch into that. So will the lecture hall die? Probably not completely. I think there will still be a place for it, but I think there will be new ways to think about it in terms of how we can multi-purpose that space. So it's used more constantly throughout the academic week, and is that something that's a shared resource out to the communities that our campuses support so deeply as well.
Mm-hmm.
I think that we're going to see continued shifts in technology along with that too. So implementing technology into our classrooms and learning spaces, really coming up with more integration so that the hybrid scenarios that we're looking at now are going to be greater adapted moving forward. Is it really necessary for everyone to sit in a 300-seat lecture hall and listen to that didactic session, or is that something that can happen through technology ahead of coming into the classroom space where you're getting more hands-on, case-based applications for really testing the concepts out instead of really receiving that information in that dedicated class time?
If there's any single building type that you feel like is going to see the money flow into, what would it be? Would it be life sciences? We just wrote a big piece on how the life sciences hubs across the U.S. are going to boom, with the pharmaceutical market ready to boom as well. Are you guys targeting any single building type on campus, or is it kind of hit or miss based on the client?
We're definitely seeing an uptick in life sciences, health sciences, but also in advanced manufacturing and technologies. So I think the shift that we're feeling in our economy of globalization and now trying to bring some of those resources more closely to home in terms of our manufacturing and pharmaceutical production, I think that's really coming home very closely, particularly here in the Southeast, where we are seeing so much growth. It's a wonderful place to be, and employers definitely see the value of that. So we're working very closely with economic development leadership within our communities and helping to partner with them and our higher education institutions to create those academic programs and certifications that are a win-win for our community. So we're training the students today to be valuable resources for these new industries that are coming to our communities and professions that we don't even know about today that are going to be so critical in 5 years.
Shawn Sowers, thank you so much for a peek into the higher education market. There's a lot happening, and you're on top of it, obviously. So I appreciate your insights and time.
Thank you so much. Appreciate the time.